Pirate God Level Cartoonist, Chapter 201-220. Chapter 201 For Your Good. The phantom flashed, and the next moment, the figures of Roha and Sanji appeared in the kingdom of Irma. However, the place where they appeared seemed a little out of place. Looking at the nearly 100 strong-looking clone soldiers with cold faces around, Roha's mouth twitched involuntarily. This momentary movement is really unreliable. At this time, the clone soldiers who were training in the square also found the two Roha who suddenly appeared. Nearly 100 clones listened in unison, and looked at Roha and the two suspiciously. This is one of the training grounds for clones. It can be called a military restricted area. How could someone come in silently? What do the guards eat? Hey, you two, don't you know this is a restricted area? How did you get in? Suddenly a clone soldier who looked extraordinarily strong came up and reprimanded the two of Roha. Independent thinking, not bad. Roha looked at the clone captain who came over with admiration and nodded. This clone soldier, whether in tone, action, or demeanor, is no different from ordinary people. It seems that Germa 68,706 feet's clone technology does have its unique side. What are you talking about here? The clone captain saw that Roha ignored him. His face suddenly turned cold, and he reached out to grab Roha. But before he could meet Roha, suddenly a thin figure stood in front of the two of them. I'm sorry, we went to the wrong place, let's go. Sanji laughed and apologized to the clone captain, and at the same time, he pushed his hand slightly and pushed towards Roha. Master, let's go, don't know them in general. Sanji whispered. Even though Sanji's voice was low, he couldn't hide the clone soldier's physical fitness far beyond that of ordinary people. Hearing Sanji's slightly frightened tone, the clone trooper smiled contemptuously and waved his hand. Moments later, several clone soldiers came up and surrounded the two of Roha. Equals, hey, what are you doing? Didn't I say everything? Let's go now. Seeing this posture, Sanji suddenly became anxious, pushing those who were blocking the way back. HC But soon, Sanji was pushed back. Let's go. The clone captain sneered. Breaking into the restricted area is a felony, and you don't want to leave today. Saying that, the clone captain even clasped his fist with one hand, making a crisp sound of joints, looking like a bully. No, listen to me. Sanji's eyes widened, his expression a little anxious. But at this moment, a palm suddenly rested on Sanji's shoulder. Turning to look, it happened to meet Roha's indifferent eyes. Master. Sanji was a little nervous in his heart, not daring to look directly into Roha's eyes. Sanji, do you remember where the Vinsmoke family lived? Roha asked suddenly. Sanji was stunned for a moment, wondering why Roha asked this suddenly, but in the end, Sanji nodded hesitantly. If I didn't change places, I do know. Hey, you two, what are you talking about? Can't you hear me, sir? The clone captain on the side saw that Roha and the two were chatting like no one else, and couldn't help but raise a few traces of real fire in his heart, and step by step, he walked towards the two of Roha angrily. These two guys dare to ignore him. Then let's go, lead the way. Roha patted Sanji on the shoulder, and added at the end, remember to walk steadily. From the beginning to the end, Roha did not look at the clamoring clone captain. Oh, all right. Sanji sighed, and understood a little in his heart. When he turned around, he couldn't help but glance at him with some pity, sneering around, looking at their clones. These idiots beep. He said that, why don't they just let them go? He has lost so many words, did they think he is afraid of them? Obviously, for their good, he saved them from making the master angry, but it's better now. The master doesn't even want to say a word, he just has to do it. But, what does the master mean by standing still? Is he going to make a big move? I don't know if the boat under my feet is strong or not. Don't be knocked down by the master. There are ordinary people on this boat. Sanji pouted, and began to complain in his heart. He raised his leg and walked towards the clone beside him. At this time, the clones around were all stunned by the strange behavior of the pair of master and apprentice. What's the situation? Can't these two see so many soldiers around? Going straight away. They think this is their home. These two masters and apprentices are not a pair of fools, right? And the imposing clone captain kept walking, catching up with Roja and the two in 3 steps and 2, reaching out and grabbing Roja's shoulder. However, at the moment when he just stretched out his hand, an invisible ripple suddenly rushed out of Roja's body, like a giant beast breaking free from the cage, instantly sweeping in all directions. Chapter 202. Gage bows his head. The clone captain who rushed to Roja only felt a sense of fear coming from the depths of his soul, and his eyes went black in a moment, and he fell to the ground. Iota. Thump, thump. The sound of secret falling to the ground came from all around the square. Where the overlord arrogance passed, countless clones fell one after another like dominoes. Just for a moment, there was no sound in the square. Looking around lightly, Roja didn't have any emotion in his eyes. However, when Roja saw Sanji froze in place, he couldn't help hooking the corner of his mouth, and immediately slapped Sanji on the head. What are you thinking? Lead the way. Good master. Sanji was in a hurry for a while, and hurriedly walked ahead and started to lead the way, his eyes wandering over the unconscious clones, his eyes full of amazement. Is this what the master saw and heard? Really strong. Strong enough to explode. Seeing that Sanji was a little heavy, but his movements were still normal, Roja smiled with satisfaction. It seems that during this period of time, the training of Sanji has really been effective, not only in strength, but also in spirit, and he can actually withstand his domineering. After walking out of the square, Roja saw at a glance, the clone soldiers pouring in black. Slightly hooked the corner of his mouth, Roja used the overlord color again, and this time, he never took it back. Wherever the two passed, with Roja as the center, within a huge radius of 100 meters, all the people rolled their eyes and fell backwards. This is Overlord is domineering. Above a tower in the distance, a man with a cold face looked at Roja walking on the street. His face was full of dignified expression. When he saw the ground where Roja walked, there were actually cracks, his pupils shrank, and he couldn't help crushing the bricks in his hand. Domineering and domineering, can it actually affect reality? What a joke. With this level of kingly domineering, even as the kingdom of Germa, he has never seen zero even after years of fighting for the clone human body. I have to tell Lord Gage that it's really troublesome this time. Roja, who pushed all the way, quickly came to the square in the center of the kingdom of Germa under the leadership of Sanji. Behind him, there are more than a dozen figures falling far behind, cautiously keeping a distance from Roja, not daring to take a step forward. That is the elite of the army of the kingdom of Germa, and the few who can resist the domineering presence of the Roja overlord are placed in the 4 seas, and they are all pirates equivalent to tens of millions. But now, they can't even make Roja look back and look at them once. Stepping into the square, Roja saw at a glance the soldiers waiting on the square, as well as a man standing at the front of the crowd with a height of more than 4 meters, a frantic blonde hair, like a lion. King of Germa Kingdom, Vinsmoke Gage. Behind Gage, there were 4 teenagers in combat uniforms. Vinsmoke IG, Niji, Yuji, Reiju. When he saw Roja walking into the square, the sound of dense gunbolts sounded instantly, forming one piece. The long spear in Jaji's hand suddenly appeared blue electric light, shining endlessly. Although I don't know where you came from, since you dare to make trouble here, you. Ellipsis. 9 flowers. Gage's face was cold and harsh, and he scolded, but when he saw Roja's appearance clearly, it was as if he was hit with a heavy hammer. What about me? Roja pulled out his ears and looked at Gage with a faint smile, as if he didn't see nearly 1,000 soldiers who were ready to go. You just. Jaji's face at this time was extremely funny. The coldness and horror that had not yet faded were mixed, which was quite funny. As a world-famous mercenary unit, Germa 66 naturally attaches great importance to intelligence collection, and on the first page of Germa 66's intelligence book, there is a long list of unprovoked strengths or roles. Among them, the Dimensional Brigade squeezed out all the forces and ranked first, with the mark of a black skull. It means that as long as there is a Dimensional Brigade in the mission location, whether it is a member of the Dimensional Brigade or a member of the Dream magazine, they must act cautiously and not provoke. If there is a conflict between the mission and the forces of the Dimension Brigade, immediately abandon the mission and withdraw from Bailey. It is conceivable how fearful the Dimensional Brigade is in Jaji's heart. After struggling for a while, Gage sighed and lowered his raised head slightly. Your Excellency Roja, this time is a misunderstanding. The people below do not know that Your Excellency is coming. If there is any offense, please atone. The four of Yuji who stood behind Jaji suddenly widened their eyes and looked at Jaji in disbelief. In their hearts, the father, who has always been high above, actually bowed his head. Chapter 203 Overbearing. The Kingdom of Germa, on the square in front of the royal palace. Looking at Gage with his head lowered, Roja was a little disappointed, but in the blink of an eye, Roja no longer struggled with this. Gage can see that the gap between the two sides is just right, and it can save a lot of effort. Atonement is impossible to talk about, but I do have something to come to you today, but before that. Saying that, Roja reached out and grabbed behind him, grabbing Sanji who was hiding behind him to the front. Go, Sanji, and say hi to your brothers and sisters. Sanji. Master Sanji. Suddenly there were exclamations one after another in the square, and everyone looked at Sanji in surprise. And Jaji was surprised for a short time, his pupils shrank suddenly, and his face suddenly darkened. He didn't forget how he treated Sanji before. When Sanji was a child, because Sanji's growth rate was far inferior to the other four children, Jaji never showed Sanji's face, and even let the three Youngji brothers bully Sanji. In the end, he even put an iron headgear on Sanji, locked him in the dungeon for half a year, and never saw him, and also announced that Sanji was dead. And the last time he saw Sanji was when Sanji escaped from prison with the help of Reiju. Gaji, who happened to meet Sanji at that time, not only did not keep Sanji who wanted to go to sea, but also ridiculed him as a disgrace to the Vinsmoke family, and took the initiative to cut off the father-son relationship with Sanji. Originally, Jaji thought that the trash like Sanji should die at sea when he went to sea, but he never expected that Sanji would actually survive well, and he also appeared with the people of the Dimension Brigade. Why did Roja appear with Sanji so aggressively? The more he thought about it, the more embarrassed Jaji's face became, and he even said that he didn't dare to think about it anymore. With the last bit of luck, Gage asked nervously, Lord Roja, what is the relationship between Sanji and you? He's my apprentice. Roja didn't hesitate. Done. The Dimension Brigade wants to avenge Sanji. Gage's face instantly turned as black as the bottom of a pot, and in the next instant, a trace of madness was born in Gage's eyes. Then why did your excellency come here today? Jaji asked with his head lowered. At this moment, blue veins appeared on the palm of his hand holding the spear. However, at this moment, Jaji suddenly felt a stabbing pain from the back of his hand, which made him groan. When he raised it and threw it, he was horrified to find that Roja had actually appeared within 10 steps of him. Don't be nervous, I'm here today to discuss a deal with you. Roja said with a light smile. Deal. Jaji subconsciously rubbed the back of his stinging hand, a little unbelievable. Wasn't he here to make trouble? And the one that started just now is Jianqi. Well, deal. Roja nodded and glanced at the thousands of soldiers around him. Don't you think you should find a more comfortable place to talk? Especially since you are still pointing so many guns at me. It was me who was abrupt. Gage hurriedly signaled the soldiers to withdraw their weapons, and personally pushed open the castle gate for Roja. Lord Roja, please. Roja nodded and walked in, but before entering the door, he suddenly stopped Sanji who was following behind. Sanji blinked. Master. You stay here and have a good reminiscence with your brothers and sisters. Roha emphasized the words, reminiscing about the old, with a playful look. When Jaji heard this, his eyes fluctuated, and he turned to look at the 4 children behind him. You guys also stay and accompany Sanji well. At the same time, Gage's hand made a few hidden gestures, with a warning on his face. Yuji raised their eyebrows, nodded reluctantly, and stayed. A few minutes later, Roha and Gage appeared in a luxuriously decorated room. Gage used his big fan-like hand to pour a cup of tea for Roha himself, then sat on the chair opposite Roha and looked at Roha expectantly. How big is the business of the Dimension Brigade? And most importantly, he may take the giant ship of the Yuan Brigade in the future. Your Excellency, what was the deal you said before? Gage rubbed his hands and looked at Roha with a smile. After Roha took a sip of tea, he said, I want all the android technology and experimental equipment in the Kingdom of Germa. Of course, I want you to work for me. All. Jaji was stunned for a moment, froze in place, and hesitantly said after a while, in terms of technology, as long as the price is sufficient, of course I can give it to you. We can also take out half of the experimental equipment. As for me. Hearing this, Roha smiled, put down the teacup, and looked straight at Gaji. You don't need to talk to me about conditions, I said it, I want it all. Chapter 204 Acting King. You. Hearing Roha's words, Gage's face suddenly became a little ugly. Such conditions would simply destroy the entire Kingdom of Germa. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. Roha smiled lightly. Since it is a transaction, I will naturally offer the corresponding price. King of the North Sea, what do you think of this title? King of the North Sea. Gage's pupils shrunk suddenly to a small point, and his face was horrified. At the same time, a surprise emotion was born in his heart. It was his lifelong dream to recreate the former glory of the Wensmoke family and to rule the North Sea again, and now the Dimension Brigade wants to help him realize his dream. But soon, Jaji said solemnly, what about the world government? They will not allow a unified 08th kingdom to appear in the North Sea. You don't have to worry about that. Roha turned the teacup in his hand with a look of indifference on his face. The world government is heading for corruption, and the scoundrels of the Tianlong people should also be cleaned up. Work for me, and when everything is over, the Vinsmoke family will achieve unprecedented glory. Saying that, Roha leaned back on the chair and squinted at Gage. Of course, after everything is over, everything must follow our rules. Different from Roha's leisure, Gage, who was sitting opposite, lowered his head at this time, his face full of tangled and struggling expressions. Jaji didn't think about the rules of the Dimensional Brigade and so on. Since he wants to rely on others, he must be honest and obedient. He still understands this kind of truth. What really troubled Gage was the information revealed in Roha's words. World government heading for corruption. Clean up the dragons. The Dimension Brigade is going to overthrow the world government and unify the world. Overthrow the world government that has ruled the world for 800 years and has more than 170 allied countries. If someone said this to him, Gage estimated that he would immediately slap him with a big mouth, and then turn the other party into material for human clones. However, it is the words of the Dimensional Brigade, which is said to surpass the 4 Emperor Pirates, and this has to make Gaji seriously consider it. After a full 10 minutes, Gage raised his head. In just 10 minutes, Jaji seemed to have passed several days, with red eyes and a crazy look on his face. I agree. Wealth is in danger. Gage is very clear that if this continues, the Vinsmoke family will not have a bright future. It is better to seize the opportunity in front of you, overwhelm everything, and finally go crazy again. Success or failure depends only on the present day. Happy cooperation. Roha smiled and shook hands with Gage. Happy cooperation. Jaji nodded heavily, but there was a layer of cold sweat on his back. Gage clearly felt that the moment he nodded in agreement, a chi that had been suppressed by Roha quietly dissipated since Roha appeared. While Gage breathed a sigh of relief, he was also frightened for a while. Sure enough, the dimensional brigade that can make a great reputation in the world is not a good man and a woman. If he doesn't agree today, then the final result is definitely something no one wants to see. But my lord, if I go to your place, Germa's sighed. Jage said hesitantly, and his address to Roja also quietly changed from, Your Excellency, to, Sir. Roja saw Gage's worry, smiled faintly, and took a sip of tea. Don't worry, we have no interest in the kingdom of Germa. On the contrary, we will help you maintain the existence of Germa and ensure the smooth development of the kingdom of Germa. However, since you are going to work with us, you will definitely be very busy. Except for occasionally arranging the general direction of Germa's development, the rest of the trivial matters must not be taken care of. Roja slowly raised his head to look at Gage, with a playful gaze. Then before you go, should you choose an acting king? Deputy king. Gage's heart tightened, and suddenly he felt a little uneasy. Sir, what do you mean? Gaji secretly broke into a cold sweat. Could it be that the Dimensional Brigade is so quick to interfere in the affairs of Kingdom 743 of Germa? Boom. Suddenly, a loud noise came out, and outside the palace, there were bursts of noise. Amidst the clamor, you can still hear a faint scolding, like, How many children? Oops. Jaji's heartbeat suddenly accelerated, and he knew without thinking that it must be Yuji and Sanji who had a conflict. Fuck, those stinky boys. There are no rules at all. Gage got up immediately, and was about to go out cursing. But before he took 2 steps, he was pulled. Sir. Gage looked at Roja with some trepidation, but his heart gradually sank. Don't be in such a hurry, the children are just fighting, let's take a look first. Roja smiled, got up and walked towards the terrace. Yeah. Gage nodded slowly, took heavy steps, and followed behind Roja. At this time, he only hoped that Youngji and the others would not be too ruthless. If Sanji was really beaten, then things would be troublesome. Chapter 205 Wishful Thinking. When I came to the terrace, the first thing I saw was a group of soldiers surrounding the square, noisily. What made JJ a little puzzled was that the faces of the soldiers were actually horrified. Those bastards, wouldn't they be heavy hands? Gigi looked anxious, and quickly trotted to the edge of the terrace, looked down, and with just one glance, Gigi couldn't help but exclaimed. How is that possible? I saw that under the walls of the castle, 3 teenagers stood facing each other. On the other side, a teenager sat down in the corner, and on the wall above his head was a circular depression. It is conceivable that the teenager was smashed into the air by someone, and then hit the wall with inertia, knocking him unconscious. This is also the real reason that made Jaji lose his temper, because it was Youngji who passed out in a coma. How is this possible? Jaji muttered to himself in a gaffe. In his impression, Sanji, who has always been a waste, was able to knock out Youngji, and he was still 1 against 3. Why is it impossible? Roja said lightly. In my opinion, Sanji's potential is much higher than the other 4. But, Jaji lost his temper, but couldn't say a word. He wanted to say that Sanji was a waste, and it was absolutely impossible to win against the children he had high hopes for, but with the facts in front of him, even he couldn't say anything. Sneak attack. Must be a sneak attack. Sanji is absolutely impossible to beat Yuji. Thinking of this, a look of grimness appeared on Gaji's face, and even his gaze towards Sanji became unkind. Roja glanced at Jaji with a light smile, and said leisurely, Jaji, do you want to bet with me? Gage was stunned for a moment, then immediately asked, what are you betting on? I'm betting that Sanji can beat the remaining 2 with 1 against 3. If he wins, I want to name a deputy king, and if he loses, I'll stop meddling in the internal affairs of the kingdom of Germa. Roja turned to look at Gage's eyes, his eyes playful. Jaji hesitated for a moment, then nodded heavily, okay. Gaji never believed that Sanji could defeat his 2 sons. Not even if his master is Roja. The bet is established, let's see, they are going to start. Roha smiled, and immediately lay on the railing and began to watch the battle. At this time, Sanji, Ig, and Niji had moved to the center of the square, and the atmosphere between the three became more and more solemn. "Brother, what should I do?" Niji came to Ig quietly and asked in a low voice. At the same time, Niji's eyes were still scanning Sanji's body, especially when he saw Sanji's legs. His face was even more solemn. Unlike Jaji, Niji personally participated in this dispute from beginning to end. Originally it was just a daily taunting of Sanji, but in their impression, Sanji, who was just a waste, broke out. With just one blow, Sanji slammed Yuji into the wall, and it took 2 seconds for him to stick to the wall before he fell and passed out. And then their angry attacks were blocked by Sanji one by one, without any effect, but their hands and feet were slightly bruised because of the collision with Sanji's kicking skills. How can this piece of shit be so strong? What else can we do? Hit. Go all out. We mustn't let this rubbish ride on our heads. Ig said through gritted teeth. When he noticed the fire in Iji's hand, Niji's pupils shrank immediately. "Brother, use that. What if I accidentally kill him? Then I'll be beaten to death." Iji's face was ferocious and terrifying. If Gaji heard what he said, he probably would have liked to put Ig back in and rebuild it. "What's the matter? I don't dare to mess with Sanji now, you still have to beat him to death." But at this time, Ig and Niji were already immersed in the shame of being defeated by the waste, and their anger was burning their reason. "Do it!" Ig shouted, and the next moment, a raging fire was ignited on his fists, only attacking Sanji. On the other hand, Niji's movements were even more astonishing. I saw his body fluctuate a bit, and the next moment, he disappeared in place. Oh, seeing this, even Roha couldn't help but be interested, subconsciously exuding a sense of domineering. Then, the invisible figure of Niji appeared in Roha's perception. Optical camouflage. No, it's more advanced than that. Roha raised his eyebrows, his heart full of admiration. With the level of technology in this world, it is really not easy for Gage to come up with this kind of thing. But want to use this little thing to defeat the Sanji he trained. Wishful thinking. Chapter 206 King Candidate. Facing Niji's disappearance, Sanji frowned and immediately started to retreat. At the same time, Sanji stepped on the ground with both feet, kicking out waves of gravel. When Sanji saw the gravel bounce in the air, he suddenly recoiled, so fast that Ig's attack landed in the air. When Ig reacted, the battle behind him was over. It was just a feint kick, followed by a side kick, and Niji, who was kicked on the chin, rolled his eyes instantly, passed out, and completely lost his combat effectiveness. With only one person left, Ig was naturally no match for Sanji, who was experienced in combat. After struggling for a minute, he was swept over the head by Sanji and lost his combat effectiveness. When he saw Niji being brought down, Gage's eyes widened, and after Ig was brought down, he even grew his mouth, with an unbelievable look on his face, which was extraordinarily funny. How is this possible? Jaji even stuttered, and at this time he felt that his worldview was about to shatter. Sanji, whom he considered trash since he was a child, actually defeated the 3 Ig brothers. Is he not dreaming? Snapped. Gage raised his hand and slapped himself, rubbing his flushed cheeks, but the look of horror on his face still didn't fade away. It seems that I won the bet. Roha's voice came from the side. Gage's heart tightened, so that Roha stood up. Let's go, it's time to see how they are doing, and by the way, decide to act as the king. Roha looked at Gage with a light smile. After he finished speaking, he walked downstairs slowly. Behind him, Gage's face turned blue and white, and after a few seconds, he followed reluctantly. In this world, Jaji, who has fought for many years, understands the truth better than many people. That is, in this world, the strong is king. The weak only have to obey orders. When Roha and the 2 appeared in the square, Yuji and the 3 had been taken away by the medical staff, leaving only the stunned Reiju and the somewhat stunned Sanji. At this time, Sanji looked straight at his hands, and his mind was confused. During the battle, he didn't think about anything, just to defeat his opponent. Sanji didn't react until the battle was over. In his eyes, a brother who was unattainable, terrifyingly strong, and called a monster, was actually defeated by him so easily. He, really that strong? Found it. I don't know when. Roha had walked to Sanji's side and looked at him with a light smile. Master. Seeing Roha, Sanji became excited all of a sudden, but he didn't know what to say when he opened his mouth. Say what? Are you saying that you are so strong now? Or are you talking about your famous battle record just now? Sanji knew that in addition to his own efforts, the reason why he was so strong was more the result of Roha's cultivation. Thanks, showing off, it's too pale. Standing there for a moment, Sanji quickly took 2 steps back and bowed deeply to Roha. Master. At this moment, in Sanji's heart, Roha's status has become irreplaceable, even more important than his own life. Even in the future, he may meet people who will be with him for a lifetime, but Roha's status in his heart will always be the highest. Although I don't know why Sanji did this suddenly, Roha also heard the sincerity in Sanji's tone, helped Sanji, and Roha patted him behind. Go, you and your sister haven't had a good conversation yet, so stay with her. In the distance, Reiju looked at Roha and Sanji with some envy. The kind of relationship between Roha and Sanji, not family, life and death, was something she had never experienced before. Yeah, Sanji nodded sensible, hurried over, pushed Reiju and walked away. Gaji, who was standing next to him, kept looking at Sanji's figure. After knowing that Sanji had left, he looked away and sighed a little sighed. Sanji, who he once thought was a waste, has grown to such a degree that a trace of remorse fills Gaji's heart. Shaking his head, Gage walked to Roha's side with a depressed expression. My lord, I will arrange for Sanji to take over the kingdom of Germa as soon as possible. I don't know. Who said I was going to make Sanji the acting king? Roha suddenly interrupted Gaji's words, looking at Gaji's confused look, slightly hooked the corner of his mouth. No, you didn't want Sanji to be the acting king. Gage couldn't help but exclaimed. Never thought about it. Roha shook his head lightly, with a funny smile on his face. Then who do you want to be? Gage looked at Roha expectantly, constantly sifting between several sons in his heart. Youngji is arrogant, impulsive and reckless, and has a slightly naive personality, so he is definitely not fit to be a king. In Niji's words, although Gaji admires his ruthlessness, Niji's temper is too short-tempered and he acts impulsive, so he is not a suitable candidate. Chapter 277 Waters City Alert. After much deliberation, there is still only the cold-blooded, ruthless, daring and careful IG, who is the most suitable candidate in Gaji's heart, and the most important thing is that in the battle just now, IG was the best among the 3 brothers. It is good. It's just that Gage knows that no matter how he chooses, the final choice is still in Roha's hands. Reiju. Roha's voice suddenly came. It turned out to be Reiju. She's pretty nice, decent, sociable, and... The laughing Gage suddenly froze for a moment, then turned around and looked at Roha in disbelief. Reiju. Gage exclaimed. What? Is there a problem? Or do you want Sanji to be the king? Roha looked at Gage with a smile, but his body exuded an unquestionable aura. No, there's no problem, but why is it Reiju? Gage sneered and asked the question in his heart. Because she can make the kingdom of Germa develop steadily. Roha looked at Gage and asked, what do you think, given the age of your 3 sons, what would you do if you suddenly gained such great power? Hearing this, Gaji couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, and then a layer of cold sweat formed on his back, and he was a little scared. Indeed, with the temper of the 3 brothers Youngji, no matter which one becomes the king, there is no peace of mind. I am afraid that it will not take half a year to provoke a lot of enemies. By then, the kingdom of Germa will definitely suffer heavy losses. Although the Dimensional Brigade promised to be the backer of the Kingdom of Germa, Jaji never thought that the Dimensional Brigade would help him clean up the trouble he caused. I see. Gaj nodded. I'll make arrangements in a moment. It's all right. Roja nodded, and immediately said, it happens that I plan to stay here for a few days, or let me see your laboratory first. Okay. Gage agreed to Roja's request without hesitation. From Roja's actions after arriving here, he finally understood that Roja really came with a cooperative mentality. Otherwise, even if Roja does not use force to force Germa to surrender, he can completely let Sanji rule the Germa kingdom and slowly annex the Germa kingdom. It is impossible for Reiju to be the king. All of this is Roja's performance of kindness. As for Roja's domineering actions, Gage never took it to heart. In this world, the strong are the capital with willful actions. If Roja is polite from beginning to end and keeps his attitude low, it is estimated that Gage will still be suspicious, worrying about what Roja is calculating. Just as Roja, under the leadership of Gage, visited the laboratory of the Kingdom of Germa, far away in the capital of Seven Waters, a visitor came that Roja could never have imagined. The capital of Seven Waters, the wharf. Carrot. A small boat quietly docked at the edge of the pier, and then, a man wearing a black courtesy, a black trench coat, and white trousers lightly jumped onto the pier. In front of his chest, there is a silver, white cross, and behind him is a long black sword nearly 2 meters in length. The greatest swordsman in the world, Eagle Eye Mahawk. It's finally here, the capital of Seven Waters. Hawkeye looked indifferently at the bustling city in front of him, his face full of anticipation. It is worth mentioning that Hawkeye, who has always been full of energy and has cold eyes, has a surprising demeanor at this time. Not only are the bags under the eyes thick, the circles under the eyes are dark, and there is an indescribable tiredness on his face, but even his normally neat hair has become a little messy. It is hard to imagine what he has experienced. Suddenly Hawkeye's eyes widened, killing intent burst out in his eyes, his whole body fluctuated endlessly, and a stinging aura bloomed on his body. However, he looked left and right, and even with the domineering look of knowledge, he couldn't find the source of his irritability. Illusion. Hawkeye frowned and walked forward cautiously. Just now, he suddenly felt a feeling of being watched, as if someone had groped his whole body, which made him very uncomfortable. Although it was only a short moment, the feeling had disappeared, but it still made Hawkeye alert. At the same time, on the edge of the capital of Seven Waters, in Yashang Tianjing's Research Institute, a dazzling red light began to flash, and a harsh alarm sounded suddenly. Open black lens bracket warn. Warn. An unknown powerhouse has arrived in the Seven Waters. An unknown powerhouse has arrived in the Seven Waters. Close black lens bracket. M9 flowers. Open black lens bracket extremely dangerous. Relevant personnel please be prepared. W. Open black lens bracket warn. Warn. There are. Close black lens bracket. Hearing the sound of the alarm, the shadow members stationed outside the institute immediately rushed into the institute. After arriving at the central laboratory, Genzo, the leader of the Huang clan, immediately came to Tianjing Yashang's side. Doctor, what happened? It's Skynet's alarm. Tianjing Yashang looked solemn and hurriedly came to a computer-like console. On the screen at this time, the entire map of the Seven Waters city appeared. Countless green light spots with different color concentrations were constantly moving in the city. On the edge of the city, a bright red light spot was slowly moving towards the city. Moving in the middle, next to the light spot, a series of numbers appeared. Genzo couldn't help shrinking his pupils when he saw this string of numbers. Each light point represents a person, and the string of numbers represents a preliminary estimate of the opponent's strength, and the string of numbers at this time is even much higher than what Artoria had tested. Doctor, can you see what the other person looks like? Wait a minute, I'm fetching surveillance footage. Without Genzo's reminder, Tianjing Yashang also knew the importance of the matter and hurriedly started the operation on the console. After a while, the projection appeared, and the eagle-eyed figure appeared in front of the two of them. Hawkeye, Mahawk, what is he doing here? Tianjing Yashang was a little puzzled, but his mood was slightly relaxed. With the character of Hawkeye, it is estimated that he is not looking for trouble. But Genzo on the side is not as easy as Tianjing Yashang. As a member of the Shadow, he must prevent all dangers. People like Hawkeye will inevitably cause great damage once they make a move. I'm going to arrange the staff. Doctor, please inform the Lord. After saying a word, Genzo hurried out. No matter what Hawkeye wants to do, when you come to the Seven Waters, you must follow the rules of the Sevens. If there is any violation, even if it is death, the Shadow must maintain the rules of the Seven Waters. This is the task of the Shadows, and theirs. What's more, there are a large number of members in the Shadows who have settled down in the Seven Waters. Chapter 208 can't remember the chapter name. Just as the members of Shadow were busy making various preparations, Accelerator and others were called back to the Seven Waters City, and Hawkeye had also entered the urban area of the Seven Waters City. Walking on the street that has been renovated many times and has become incomparably spacious, the indifferent look of Hawkeye has a surprised look. As early as 3 years ago, he visited the Seven Waters capital once. At that time, the Seven Waters capital gave him the impression that it was just a more distinctive city. But now, Hawkeye even dares to say that the Seven Waters is simply the most perfect city he has ever seen in his life. Not only the luxurious and tidy streets, rich and exquisite public facilities, and various green vegetation, but also the faces of pedestrians on the roadside are full of happy and satisfied smiles. In this era, people in the whole city have such a smile, which Hawkeye has never seen before. What is it that makes them so happy? Under the doubts, Hawkeye did not choose to go directly to his destination, but wandered around on the street. This walk made him see a very puzzling situation. On the way, he found a lot of people, and when he was walking, he suddenly laughed, or just muttered to himself. I also saw a lot of people sitting lazily on free chairs by the roadside, doing nothing, just looking straight ahead, and pointing their hands in the air. In addition to these, he can even see ordinary people who are powerless and burly men with tattoos arguing. Hawkeye can't hear the content of the quarrel, but he vaguely hears something similar to, the hour. Words like, whose fault, are probably discussing the plot of the comics. This made Hawkeye very surprised, and he couldn't help but take a second glance. When he saw with his own eyes that the brawny man was being slapped with a blushing face and a thick neck, Hawkeye was really shocked. You know, this is a great root of lawlessness that ordinary person wears the clothes of ordinary people. How dare to provoke the person who looks like a pirate so much? And that brawny man was said to be like that in public, but he didn't do it. The surprised Eagle Eye, the more he walked, the more he couldn't understand what was going on in the capital of Seven Waters, and finally he simply found a place that looked like a bar and walked in. I randomly found a corner at the bar, stared at the menu for a while, and finally ordered an expensive drink called Baiju. He wanted to taste what such expensive wine tasted like. Sir, you have a good eye. The brewing method of this liquor, but our boss spent a lot of money to exchange it from Skynet. Drinking it will definitely give you an unforgettable aftertaste. The bartender standing behind the bar turned his head when he heard Hawkeye's call. When he saw the appearance of the other party, Hawkeye was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously exclaimed, Sasaki Kojira. The bartender looked suspiciously at Hawkeye's gaffe, and a look of contempt flashed in his eyes. Haven't even seen the cosplay personally named by the Dimension Brigade. However, due to the duties of the service staff, the bartender still smiled and said to Hawkeye, Sir, is this the first time you have come to us? We are a themed bar, and we will change the theme every week. Of course, we are responsible for the service. The girls will also play various roles. Having said that, the bartender made a, expression. At this time, Hawkeye also reacted. The other party is indeed very similar to Sasaki Kojira, but there is no imposing manner or sense of power all over his body. With an eagle-eyed oolong, he smiled awkwardly, took the liquor from the bartender, and took a sip directly. Cough cough cough. Liquor poured into his throat, and the burning feeling came up instantly. For a while, Hawkeye only felt that his throat was on fire, and he coughed violently. The bartender on the side handed over a glass of water at the right time. When Hawkeye came over, he looked at his clothes curiously. "Sir, are you playing Hawkeye?" The bartender looked at Hawkeye in surprise. It was the first time he saw someone who dared to play a real person. "Isn't he afraid of being beaten?" "Huh, Hawkeye raised his eyebrows, and finally nodded indifferently. It was only then that he realized why he was walking on the street in 2.9, but no one recognized him. It was estimated that he regarded himself as the same man in front of him, acting as someone else. But that's fine, Hawkeye can also experience the long-lost normal life. By the way, what are you talking about, Skynet? Ever since Hawkeye entered the city, he'd heard people mentioning this term constantly. He heard it again in the bartender's mouth just now. He couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. Asked. "Skynet, that's a good thing." There was a look of longing on the bartender's face. Chapter 209 Internet Addicted Youth, Eagle Eye. "Hey, that's not right." The bartender suddenly reacted and looked at Hawkeye with a look of surprise. "Sir, don't you know about Skynet? It's in newspapers all over the world. You know, as early as a month before Skynet officially opened, Dream magazine's publicity covered most of the world. After the official release, it made everyone ignorant. It stands to reason that as long as people who do not live in the mountains and forests should know about the existence of Skynet." Hawkeye was stunned for a moment, and then he understood a little, and touched his dark circles in embarrassment. "I have been at sea some time ago, and I don't have time to buy newspapers. I have practiced Yanwei day and night, and I have not succeeded in such a thing so far. Hawkeye will never tell anyone." "That's it." The bartender nodded, thought for a moment, and frowned. "But if you ask me what Skynet is, I really don't understand, sir. Just log into Skynet and you'll know." Log in. How to log in? Hawkeye wondered. At the same time, a mysterious island could not help but emerge in 08 Hawkeye's mind. Countless people came from all directions by boat and landed ashore. Is Skynet the name of an island? Looking at the doubtful eagle eyes, the bartender smiled proudly. That smile is like the pride that people living in big cities have for the villagers living in the village. As long as you silently recite "landing on Skynet" in your heart, the bartender replied. Silent. Hawkeye raised his eyebrows, and immediately recited it in his heart suspiciously. Log into Skynet. However, a few minutes passed and nothing happened. Hawkeye looked at the bartender suspiciously. Bartender glanced at Hawkeye. Is it on board? Hawkeye shook his head. No. The bartender was stunned for a moment, and then looked at Hawkeye again. This time, his eyes were extremely serious, and he even took back the arrogance that he always had. After his eyes stayed on the long knife behind Hawkeye for a long time, the bartender couldn't help shrinking his pupils, and finally he opened his mouth tremblingly. Sir, are you really Hawkeye? Hawkeye raised his head, glanced at the other party, and did not speak. But just at this moment, the bartender was scared to pee his pants. He didn't take a close look at Hawkeye's appearance just now, but now that he looked at it, it was exactly the same as the one on the wanted list, especially those sharp golden eyes, which were terrifyingly cold. You must know that no matter how fast the cosplay industry develops, without technology such as beauty contact lenses, all cosplayers cannot change the color of their eyes, and there can be no second person in the world with these eagle eyes. Thinking of this, the bartender suddenly trembled like a pendulum. What did he just do? He actually treats Hawkeye as a hillbilly. Resisting the urge to run away, the bartender stuttered and said, "Duh. Sire, can you restrain yourself?" Hawkeye looked at each other suspiciously. Seeing that Hawkeye didn't get angry, the bartender tugged at his soaked trousers before continuing. There is an introduction on Skynet. It is said that if the strong sense of prevention is too strong, it may block Skynet's signal and lead to login. If you fail, you just need to put away your mental resistance. Quote. Put away the resistance. Hearing this, Hawkeye couldn't help frowning, and unreservedly unfolded his spirit to the unknown existence, but it was a very dangerous thing. It is even said that if the other party has bad intentions, he will be severely damaged in an instant. After thinking for a while, curiosity still overcomes resistance, and Hawkeye calmed down for a while. Then, whispered, landing in Skynet. Looking at Hawkeye's suddenly surprised face and the look in his eyes, the bartender smiled secretly in his heart. So what if he is the most famous swordsman in the world? He is a country bumpkin in the face of super-era technology like Skynet. Thinking of this, the bartender couldn't help but twitch his lips again. He has despised Hawkeye and explained Skynet for Hawkeye. He can blow this shit for a lifetime. Suddenly, a cool feeling came from the crotch, and the bartender's face suddenly forced a bit, bowed his waist, and quietly left the bar. Behind him, the joy on Hawkeye's face grew stronger, as if he had discovered a rare treasure. Time passed quickly, and Hawkeye sat at the bar until late at night, until the staff reminded him that he was a little reluctant to quit Skynet and walked out of the bar. As soon as he left the bar, he couldn't wait to find a small hotel, and after ordering something to eat, he landed on Skynet again. In the morning 3 days later, Roja finally returned to the Seven Waters. In fact, as early as the first time Hawkeye arrived, Shadow had called him, but Roja didn't think about the reason for Hawkeye's trouble, so he didn't come back and was busy with the work at hand. Anyway, he has teleportation, and it's only a matter of a moment to go anywhere. When Hawkeye really does it, it's not too late to go. Roja had just appeared in the Research Institute, and Genzo, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately came to Roja's side. Has Hawkeye's purpose been found out? Roja asked while walking towards the Skynet main control room located in the deepest part of the Research Institute. 200 inches no. Genzo shook his head in shame. What is that eagle eye doing now? Hawkeye was on Skynet in a hotel. What about before? It's also on Skynet. Huh. Roja stopped and looked at Genzo with a look of surprise. Have you been on Skynet for 3 days? Yes. Genzo shook his head a little slowly. When he just got the news, Genzo was as surprised as Roja. He also knew about the #1 swordsman in the world, and it was really unreasonable for cats to go to Skynet in a small hotel every day. But after both Skynet and Shadow had been under surveillance for 3 days, even Genzo had to admit that Hawkeye's interest in Skynet was beyond everyone's imagination. According to Skynet's statistics, Hawkeye is online for more than 16 hours a day, and the food and drink are all in the hotel room and brought in by the hotel staff. Furthermore, he also uploaded 4 articles on Skynet to exchange experience, 1 article about kendo experience, 3 articles about swordsmanship training, and finally, in the trading section, he uploaded a treasure map to exchange experience. Hearing this, a ridiculous look appeared on Roja's face. This is so special, Hawkeye won't get addicted to the internet, right? Chapter 210 Eagle Tearful. After listening to Genzo's report and being confirmed on Skynet, Roja also hesitated. Should I go to Hawkeye or not? After thinking for a while, Roja still felt that he had to go, not only because of the hospitality of the host, but more because he wanted to see how bad his swordsmanship was compared to Hawkeye. How many? Yes, how much is the difference? Maybe Roja may defeat Hawkeye when he opens the stigmata, but it is only comprehensive strength, not swordsmanship. He only got the inheritance of the 3 parts of Luyu's sword, but he did not think arrogantly that his attainments in swordsmanship could surpass the eagle eye who had been addicted to kendo for a lifetime. It's not just a matter of time, it's a matter of mentality. Coming from modern society, his understanding and obsession with kendo is far less pure than that of swordsmen in this world. They can study kendo all their lives and practice swords all the time, but Roja can't do it. Too many things involve him. For Roja, kendo is only a way to enhance his strength. If there is another ability that is more suitable for him, he will only abandon kendo ruthlessly. An hour later, Roja appeared in a hotel located on the edge of the Seven Waters. Dong, dong, boom. Roha knocked on the door. After a while, footsteps were heard in the room, and the door was opened from the inside. Who is it? Hawkeye stood at the door, rubbing his eyes, looking like he didn't wake up. At this time, Roha stood on the spot, as if petrified, and there was even a sound of glass breaking in his mind. His worldview is about to collapse. Who is going to tell him? Who is this man with pale face, dark eye rims, and hair that looks like a bird's nest? This is definitely not the eagle eye in his impression. Absolutely not. The eagle eye in his impression should be a peerless swordsman who is handsome and compelling, tall and straight, and cold-eyed. Definitely not the guy in front of me who is like an internet addict. Excuse me, Roha said blankly, then slammed the door shut. Ouch, came a painful cry from the room. The next moment, Fang Ben was sent inside and opened, and eagle eyes full of anger appeared in front of Roha, and of course, the red nose and the tears lingering in his eyes. It can be seen that Roha closed the door just now, which really confused Hawkeye. After rushing out of the door, he just wanted to get angry, but when he saw Roha's appearance, he couldn't help but stunned, and he glanced at Roha's body with some doubts. Alternative, I. Alternative, and GT. When he felt the vigorous power in Roha's body, his eyes suddenly sharpened. Who are you? Eagle Eye touched behind him subconsciously, and then his body froze for a moment. Girl, look at Skynet too seriously, I haven't carried the knife for several days. Seeing Hawkeye's eyes, Roha also slowed down and stretched out his hand. Dimension Brigade, Roha. Hawkeye froze for a moment, then immediately stretched out his hand to shake hands with Roha, looking directly into Roha's eyes. Jorakol Mahak. Where are you here? Hawkeye looked at Roha suspiciously, and his eyes swept quietly to the stairs. From the beginning, he found that there was no sound in the entire hotel, not even the first-floor lobby that was always noisy, not even the slightest sound came from it. Aren't you going to invite me in to sit? Roha pretended not to see Hawkeye's gaze, and said with a smile on his face. Even if Roha did not instruct, the shadowy people emptied the entire hotel long before Roha arrived. Of course, all the tenants who were cleared out received a red envelope that satisfied everyone. Please come in. Hawkeye hesitated for a moment, then moved away from the door. Walking into the room, Roha glanced around and breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the room was fairly tidy, and there was no situation where the lunch boxes were thrown all over the floor and cockroaches were walking all over the place as he expected. At this time, Hawkeye didn't know that in Roha's heart, he was even equated with a teenager who was deeply addicted to the internet, the kind who needed electrotherapy. Taking a stool at random, Roha sat down and looked at Hawkeye. How is it? Is Skynet easy to use? Roha asked casually. It's very useful. Hawkeye maintained his usual indifference, and immediately changed the conversation, looked at Roha and said, it would be better if there was no monitoring function. Found out. Roha raised his eyebrows, his face did not change at all. After all, Skynet is just a special kind of spiritual network. If it is placed in the past life, of course, it will not be noticed by others, but in the world of pirates with powerful individuals, it is only a momentary thing to be noticed by those strong people. But what about where? People in this world have basically zero research on spiritual power. What they can do is to prevent Skynet from invading their own spirits. As for wanting to escape Skynet's search and shield Skynet's surveillance. Stupid dream. As long as they are in Skynet, it is impossible for them to escape Skynet's surveillance. Roha smiled nonchalantly, not answering Hawkeye's topic at all. What about other than this, such as Kendo experience or something? Long before he came, Roha had made adequate preparations, including reading Hawkeye's browsing records and consumption lists on Skynet. In Hawkeye's consumption list, he spent more than 90% of his experience points to buy all kinds of swordsmanship experience and swordsmanship skills and everything related to swordsmanship. Although it looks like he is learning swordsmanship, how could Hawkeye need to learn other people's swordsmanship? After repeated research, Roha finally found the problem. All the kendo goods purchased by Eagle Eye are of various styles, regardless of type, whether it is a thin sword, an épée, a double sword, a short sword. He buys all the kendo-related goods, and he will not refuse to come, even if it is just a practice. Jian has several years of novice experience, and he will take a closer look at it. This time, Roha finally understood what Hawkeye wanted. Gather the strengths of hundreds of schools, help yourself, and seek breakthroughs in kendo. Of course, kendo all the way is not just a thing on paper. If you really want to break through, you also need countless battles to temper. This is exactly why Roha came here. Hawkeye needs a sword training object, and he needs it too. In the past 3 days, have you come up with some theories? Roha looked at Hawkeye with a smile. How is it? Do you want to have a few actual battles? Hearing this, Hawkeye couldn't help but look up at Roha, his eyes radiating fighting intent. When? Now. Chapter 211 Roha vs. Hawkeye. Feeling the fighting intent on Roha's body, Hawkeye was also excited, stood up and touched the black knife Yi on the side, and was about to follow Roha. But just after a few steps, Hawkeye suddenly remembered something and stopped. What's wrong? Roha, who had already reached the door, turned back curiously. Can you wait for me outside for a while? Hawkeye turned his head away in embarrassment. Although Hawkeye's expression was still indifferent, Roha still felt the slightest difference in his tone. Glancing at Hawkeye's messy hair and wrinkled clothes, Roha immediately understood. Does this mean you want to wash your hair, tidy up and go out? Okay, I'll go down and have a cup of tea first. Roha nodded and closed the door. Walking on the stairs, Roha smiled and shook his head. No matter what the images in the anime, in the real world, they are just living people. Even the Eagle Eye of the world's largest swordsman, when he lives at home, he is no different from ordinary people. And it seems, can stay a little more. Sitting downstairs, Roha made several calls in a row, and after drinking another cup of tea, Hawkeye finally walked down. Let's go. Roha smiled lightly and looked at Hawkeye, who had regained his former demeanor. Go. 193, there was a fiery fighting intent. The capital of Seven Waters, 300 miles away, on an unknown island. At this time, in the center of the island, Roha and Hawkeye stood opposite each other. This island is uninhabited, and there are no ships around, just right. Roha smiled and took out a blood-red long knife from the storage space. Muramasa, didn't this sword disappear? Seeing the scarlet long knife, Hawkeye raised his eyebrows, and his face showed interest. Forget it. Roha stroked Muramasa's blade with gentle eyes. I also got it by chance, and I have never used it. In order not to reveal his identity, Roha never let Mujung experience real combat, and the famous sword was dusty, but today, he finally has an opponent worthy of his shot. Then I'm its first opponent. It's an honor. Hawkeye held a sword in both hands, his body was full of momentum, and the sword energy was overflowing. This is also my honor. Roha closed his eyes slightly, and when he opened his eyes again, a flash of white light flashed in his eyes. Unlike Hawkeye's majestic aura, the moment Roha opened his eyes, the aura all over his body instantly disappeared. No, it didn't disappear, but was completely suppressed in his body, like a dam was erected, blocking the majestic momentum in his body. Only when the flood is released, destroy everything. Seeing this, S eyes suddenly became solemn. At this time, Roha, in his heart, has become a beast that has been dormant all the time. If he doesn't make a move, he will hurt people. What shocked Hawkeye even more was Roha's eyes. Indifferent, Gyubo was not shocked. As if in a flash, Roha had lost all his emotions and turned into a machine born purely for combat. Open black lens bracket absolutely calm close black lens bracket open. Woo, underscore. A breeze blew quietly from the edge of the island. Wherever he passed, the grass was low and swaying endlessly, and the huge canopy swayed slightly. I don't know when, a green leaf quietly separated from the branches and floated to the ground. The atmosphere between Roha and Hawkeye gradually became solemn as the leaf fell. Finally, the leaves fell to the ground. Swa, underscore. Two sounds of tearing the air sounded, and almost at the same time, Roha and Hawkeye instantly disappeared in place. Boom. A sound of golden iron symphony sounded first, followed by an explosive shock wave, which appeared from the middle of the open space, and spread to dozens of meters in the blink of an eye, shaking everything in a radius of 100 meters. Before the first shock wave dissipated, another shock wave appeared again from the place where the two fought. The earth is howling, the air is shaking. Countless giant trees in the sky were ruthlessly cut off by the flowing sword energy, and then cut into pieces. In just a few seconds, the two had already fought dozens of knives against each other. On the ground around them, there were sword marks over 10 meters long. This is still Roha and Hawkeye, the tacit choice to compete in swordsmanship, without using a lot of sword energy. In other words, this is completely the air blade that they tore out with strength. After the 110 moves, it was another head-to-head slash, and the ground beneath the two of them suddenly collapsed. As expected of Hawkeye, it's really strong. Roha shook his numb arm with admiration on his face. However, Hawkeye didn't eat this set at all. He frowned slightly and looked at Roha, his eyes dignified. The battle just now gave him a strange feeling. He could clearly feel that Roha's swordsmanship was obviously 2 points worse than his. It stands to reason that even if Roha's sword is so fast that he cannot win in a short time, he should have some advantages, and it should not be a draw like this. Thinking back to the battle just now, Hawkeye's gaze became solemn again. He finally recalled that in the battle just now, he clearly had 3 chances to inflict heavy damage on Roha, but each time he had not waited for him to shoot. Roha's sword had already waited there in advance, making him fall short. Ultimately seen and domineering, Hawkeye asked inquiringly. No, Roha raised his eyebrows and immediately shook his head. His foresight is still a little worse than the ultimate domineering look, and the effect of being able to see the future for a short time, but each has its own advantages. Foresight, the biggest advantage is that it has no consumption at all, and it is turned on 24 hours a day. Hearing Roha's denial, Hawkeye didn't ask more, but narrowed his eyes and looked at Roha. This is not all your strength, Hawkeye said suddenly. Huh? Roha raised his eyebrows. Just now, he really had the mind to hone his swordsmanship and did not use the stigmata. Has this been discovered? In the end, Roha nodded and admitted it. Woo. Hawkeye suddenly took a deep breath, then spit it out, and looked at Roha solemnly. Can I experience it? Let me see your true power. Of course you can. Roha smiled. Without having to say Hawkeye, he also planned to use the stigmata to completely defeat Hawkeye. The next second, Roha bowed slightly, the horizontal sword was on his side, and the golden light on his wrist flashed away. Then, a bang resounded over the entire island. Chapter 212 Steelmaking is over. This battle lasted for a full hour. By the time the battle was over, the jungle-covered island had completely changed. Not only did the trees on the entire island fall to the ground, but even the small hills on the island were razed to the ground. The entire island was as if it had been bombed by artillery, and the original one could never be recovered. Look! On the beach by the sea, Roha was sitting leisurely on a reef. Not far from him, there was a ragged eagle eye with a look of embarrassment. I lost. Hawkeye looked at Roha indifferently. From now on you will be the #1 swordsman in the world, but I will defeat you sooner or later. Don't. Roha waved his hand. I'm not interested in the world's largest swordsman or something. You should take it yourself, and I win by the body host, not the swordsmanship. I can't win. Woo. Hawkeye didn't speak. He who was not good at words just glanced at Roha silently, turned around and walked away. Hey, what are you doing? Roha stopped Hawkeye. Leave, practice, and then come back to challenge you, Hawkeye said without turning his head. Roha was stunned for a moment, and then said with a strange expression, "Are you going to swim back?" "You know, when I came just now," but Roha moved over with an eagle eye, and there was no ship at all. When Hawkeye heard this, he also reacted, his body suddenly stopped, and he did not move, and the atmosphere between the two suddenly became awkward. Hawkeye stood there, his face turning blue and white. "This is so special," the plot agreed by a strong man was destroyed like this. "Ah. Talking about boats, talking about swimming, as if you don't know, isn't it good to save some face for him?" Roha broke the awkward atmosphere. "That's it, don't leave either, I'll go back to the Seven Waters with me later. Anyway, you can't find any strong enough guys to challenge you when you go out, and the 4 emperors and the navy can't touch it, so it's better to fight with me every day. Of course, it's not without conditions. During your stay in the Seven Waters, you have to help me train my men. By the way, I will also let the rest of the Dimensional Brigade learn from you. Of course, I can also rehearse the Yanwei you want the most." Hearing the last sentence, Hawkeye raised his brows and turned around. "Good." Roha suddenly laughed, and there was another helper. In this way, Hawkeye has lived in the Seven Waters for a long time, and will play a game with Roha every few days. In the rest of his free time, he will also discuss with Monet, Accelerator, Arturia and the others, and guide by the way. Take a look at the swordsman in Shadow. And Yan returned. Roha also consumed a fragment and demonstrated a skill far beyond the limits of human beings for Hawkeye, which made Hawkeye completely convinced. Time flies by, and in the blink of an eye, Roha came to the 9th comic in this world, and Fullmetal Alchemist FA also ushered in the last issue. Fullmetal Alchemist, this comic can be said to be Roha's most ugly character model so far, and even the beginning of the plot is not as attractive as other comics. The vast majority of readers pinched their noses and read it just because of the name, Gaushi, and because the comic was drawn by Gaushi. But even so, after the little girl Nina was used alchemy by his father to make her and the pet dog Alexander into a chimera, a monster that looks like a lion and can speak human words, a large number of readers still gave up. I read this comic and wrote a letter to severely condemn this comic. The content is too dark. It even said that after the release of Nina's issue, Roha found that the fan value he gained that month was actually a little less than last month. One can imagine how disappointed the readers are with the steelmaking in this issue. Even Monet came to Roha and asked him if he should change a comic and cut the steel directly. However, Roha did not agree, and still let the steel chain continue. Because he knew that steelmaking was a truly outstanding comic and that the lows were only temporary. Sure enough, the unique plot of Steel Lien attracted some readers who really read the comics. They discussed the plot, the background of the world, and the ideas and beliefs in the plot, as if they were discussing their daily life. Steelmaking has this magic. It is even said that Edward, the protagonist of steelmaking, is not beautiful in appearance, and his stature is even shorter, and his strength is not even top-notch in the comics. Ellipsis. 9 flowers. And in the whole comic, Edward only mastered one kind of power from the beginning to the end, and he did not upgrade in the slightest. In the finale, he even lost his own power and the alchemy that he depended on for a living. But the vast majority of readers happily accepted this ending, as if they had seen their whole life. Work hard, move towards brilliance, fight for your own beliefs, and in the end, for the same beliefs, you are willing to be ordinary and give everything. This is the real, people. Lessons without pain are meaningless, because people can't gain without sacrifice. However, when people finally overcome this pain, when they cross the limit of their own hearts, they will gain unyielding a strong heart for anything. Close black lens bracket. Yes, a heart of steel. Close black lens bracket. With the words of the protagonist of the story Edward Elric, Fullmetal Alchemist FA finally ushered in the final ending in the Call of Reluctance. On the great route, on the blue sea, the green pheasant sitting on the bow slowly closed the magazine in his hand with a look of sigh. Gently putting the comic aside, looking at the sea in the distance, Aokiji slowly exhaled. Are you exceeding your limit? Roha, what is your limit? And where is mine? Aokiji's eyes were a little confused. Yes, Aokiji suddenly found that his life had been too dull. At a very early time, he obtained the fruit of the natural system known as the strongest series. After that, he followed Garp again, and he rarely met an opponent. So far, he has never experienced a real undead battle. Even after leaving the Navy, Lena and Leah have been wandering in the new world for the reason that Lena and Leah can't stand the war. Business. It's time to do something meaningful, Qingzi thought. After thinking for a moment in his mind, Aokiji stood up. After smiling at the two sisters who were frolicking in the distance, Aokiji looked to the south. Maybe, it's time to look there. Chapter 213 Comics, on top of the war chapter. The South China Sea, the border of the Kingdom of Egypt. The vast army, with thousands of people, marched slowly towards the royal city of the Farron Kingdom. In the center of the team, Eustace Skid sat on top of a wagon, flipping through the comics. A few minutes later, he closed the comic with some regret, and his face was a little unhappy. Damn Gaushi, this is the end of it. Draw more, I can't see enough. Kid summoned a handful of iron sand as if venting, and slammed it on the ground. The rubble splashed everywhere. Shoot! It happened that a man passed behind Kid and was hit a few times by gravel. When he saw the appearance of the person being beaten, Kid didn't even think about it and stood up. I'm sorry. The man, who was nearly 7 meters tall and looked like a hill, turned his head slowly, lowered his head and glanced at Kid, and shook his head lightly. It's okay. After saying that, the man held the book in his hand and walked away slowly. Seeing that the other party was not angry, Kid breathed a sigh of relief and did it. Even if his current strength is pretty good, there are still a few people in this army that he can't afford to offend at all. Among them is the man just now, Shichibukai, and Bartholomew Bear. Really, I'm taking Chiwahai again, and I'm fighting the Navy. What the hell is going on? Is the Navy fighting? Kid pouted, but his eyes couldn't help but look at his feet. In the carriage under his feet, there are 2 huge iron boxes, each of which is 2 meters in length, width and height. Wide, narrow slits for ventilation. In the 2 iron boxes, a burly man was locked separately. Burning Mountain, Stoloberg. That's right, the army where Kid is now, under the leadership of Estes, officially defeated the Navy's Crusade fleet 3 days ago, and captured 2 lieutenant generals. Only the flying squirrel escaped with serious injuries. The eldest sister's head is real. What are you doing with these 2 guys? Kid's face was a little unhappy, but it was more of a worry. Just defeated the naval forces, and captured a large number of Navy and 2 lieutenant generals of the naval headquarters. I am afraid. The real big force of the Navy is coming. Kid guessed right, the Navy headquarters has been in chaos because of this incident. Naval Headquarters, Marin Vando, in the Marshal's office. Quote. After the war, I only recruited less than 1,000 of my subordinates, and most of the rest have been captured. That's it. From the other end of the phone, came the weak voice of a flying squirrel. Got it, find a safe place to recuperate, don't take any more shots. This time, it's not something you can solve, Warring States said with a solemn expression. C. After saying, I understand Q, the flying squirrel hung up the phone. The marshal's office suddenly became quiet, and the atmosphere condensed. Bastard! Warring States roared, and slapped his palm on the table in front of him, bullying violently in his chest. Sengoku has never been so angry since he was promoted to admiral. He could endure the Marijoya incident, because he couldn't get used to the Tianlong people for a long time, and the Tianlong people suffered, and he wanted to stand by and watch the play. He can also endure the damned comics of the Dimension Brigade, because the Dimension Brigade has never been an enemy of the world government, because the Dimension Brigade is strong enough. But now, how dare a force that came out of nowhere dare to be so blatant as an enemy of the world government? What kind of onions are they? Bartholomew Bear, Eustace Skid, and the mysterious general. Sengoku gritted his teeth, and the flying squirrel told his rebel leader, his face terrifyingly cold. He wants these people to learn a lesson and understand what it means to be an enemy of the world government. Guards, inform all Marin Fanduon, Lieutenant General and above to gather. I want to hold a meeting in the general conference room. Sengoku shouted towards the door. Malin Fando, messed up. This progress is a bit fast. Roha looked at the dynamics of Sengoku and Garp, who was particularly concerned, and couldn't help twitching the corners of his mouth. If the naval government really shoots 2 or even 3 general-level powerhouses, Estes really can't stand it. Although the arrangement on Estes is not very important to Roha, he just does it casually, but he really doesn't want to end it so soon. After thinking about it, Roha picked up the phone bug beside him and made a call. Lord Roha, Mom is sleeping, what's the matter? If it's important, I'll go and wake Mom up. On the other end of the phone, came the respectful voice of Katakori. Don't bother, you should be able to call the shots. Luo Yadin smiled and said, can you be more active recently and send a few ships to go to G5 and various naval bases? Katakori on the phone bug's side couldn't help frowning. After a while, he nodded. Yes, but can you tell me the reason? Just sending a few ships to go around, not to fight a war. Katakori knows this kind of thing without asking. Big Mom will definitely agree. Now, no force in the world will give up any opportunity to sell the favor of the Dimensional Brigade. We have an action here. I hope you can contain the Navy and make their strong men dare not leave easily. It turns out that, when my mother wakes up, I will tell her as soon as possible. It is estimated that our ship will be able to go to sea early tomorrow morning. On the other end of the phone, Katakori immediately agreed. After Roha expressed his gratitude, he hung up the phone. After thinking about it for a while, I made another phone call to the Whitebeard Pirates and Roswald Saint who was far away in Marijoa. 3.4 The Whitebeard Pirates are just harassing them. As for Saint Roswald, it has been silent for too long, and it is time to explode. You must know that in the past few months, Roha has sent more than a dozen members of the Shadows to Marijoa. After processing, Roha thought for a while, and finally nodded with satisfaction. With the restraint of these 3 parties, at least 2 or more generals of the world government can be restrained, and there will be no problem with Estes. If the Navy is desperate, Roha had to release a trick. In his storage space, there has always been a thick comic book. It is written on the cover of the manga. One Piece, The Top War. Chapter 214 Comics, One Punch Man. A few calls from Roha, the effect was immediate. Several pirates poured out from the station of the 2 big 4 Emperor pirates, Big Mom and Whitebeard, and wandered in the whole new world. Countless pirates were shivering with fright at this unprecedented grand occasion, and all kinds of guesses appeared in everyone's mind. One of the most convincing rumors is that the Big Mom pirates and the Whitebeard pirates are about to fight. But when someone saw the pirate ships of the 2 pirate groups pass by without any conflict, the rumors were broken without attack. Although it is said that the 2 big 4 Emperors pirate groups did not fight, the pirates in the New World will suffer. If they accidentally encounter the wandering ships of the 2 big pirate groups and accidentally provoke each other, they will be a group in minutes. Rhythm of extinction. Under the sudden chaotic situation in the New World, the sudden death of a heavenly dragon in the Holy Land Marijoa seemed so insignificant. In this case, the Navy headquarters also fell into an embarrassing situation. In the waters near the G5 branch, the 3rd and 6th divisions of the Whitebeard pirates were found, as well as the flagship of the Big Mom pirates Katakori, the entrance to the New World, and the 2nd division of the Whitebeard pirates was found, the 7th division, the 8th division, the 10th division and a large number of ships of the Big Mom pirates. Quote, so far, the cause of the pirate riot has not been found. General Yellow Monkey, stationed in the G5 branch, sent a contact 3 hours ago, hoping to get reinforcements. 2 days ago in the Holy Land Marijoa, another heavenly dragon died. The Heavenly Dragon Council was furious and ordered the Navy to send people to collect the lawless people in the city. Commander Cyborg was kept by the chairman of the Dragon Council, Ichijin, and could not escape. Chief Instructor Zephyr sent a telegram from Shihai, saying that if there is a summoning mission, he is willing to return immediately. General Sakazuki. In the marshal's office, a messenger read out the information in his hand one by one. The sound disappeared after a few minutes, and he stood straight in the same place. No more. Warring States folded his hands and stood on the table, his head lowered, shadows covering his eyes. Even if he couldn't see the appearance of the Warring States, the messengers could feel the depressing aura of the Warring States. No, no more. Then you go out, Warring States said in a low voice. Yes. The messenger saluted, put the document on the Warring States table, and left in a hurry. The door was gently closed, and the room fell into a dead silence. The Warring States period stood there like a statue, motionless. Garp and Crane, who were sitting beside them, seemed to feel the suppression of the Warring States period didn't make a sound, sat there silently, bowing their heads in thought. And G.T. After a long time, a long sigh came from the room. Sengoku raised his head, looked tired. Cap, you go to the New World. Carp was stunned for a moment, then frowned, but the crusade. There are not enough people. Crane said from the side. At least 2 people are needed in the New World. Warring States and Cyborg cannot be easily dispatched. The only ones who can lead the way are Akainu and Zephyr. Training new recruits in the West Sea. Saying that, the Crane suddenly changed his style of painting and turned to look at the Warring States. You have already discovered it. Warring States nodded solemnly. What a coincidence. The memory of the crusade has just started here, and the New World and Mary Jo are in trouble. Obviously, they don't want the Navy to send out the crusade fleet. However, inciting 2-4 Emperor-level pirates. There is only the Dimensional Brigade. He looked solemnly at the Warring States. What are you going to do? Warring States hesitated for a long time, finally shook his head and stood up. You guys go out first, let me think for a while. Garp and Crane froze for a moment, then walked out. Before going out, Crane stopped and turned to look at Sengoku with some worry. You don't have to be too stressed. The Dimension Brigade may not be your enemy. My enemy. Warring States raised his brows and keenly noticed that there was something in his words, but he didn't react for a while. When he wanted to stop his figure had disappeared in the corridor. Half an hour later, 3 orders came from the Marshal's office. Hit General Garp and led his fleet to help the New World. Ordered the Navy Criminal Minds Department to go to the Holy Land Mary Joa. The crusade plan was temporarily suspended, and General Sakazuki was on standby. And after these 3 orders, a private order ordered by the Warring States himself was conveyed to the ears of several navies. That night, several former Navy members who once belonged to the flagship of the Warring States went to the Goya Kingdom in the East China Sea and the Farron Kingdom in the South China Sea, respectively, with an unknown mission. When he learned that the Navy had put the crusade plan on hold, Roha was staying at home, busy with comics. The steelmaking has been completed, but he has not yet determined the next comic to be serialized. What exactly is good to draw? Roha lay on the bed, sliding his fingers in the void. Although the comics drawn last time were not good, Roha still has some stock for so long. Now, he is looking through the comics he has drawn but did not draw in the storage space. Dragon Ball. No, although I haven't seen a Traveler for a long time, but if a big boss comes out, Roha can't play it now. One Piece. No, although Roha has already drawn the war chapter and several important plots, but now is not the time to release it. After looking through it for a long time, Roha finally stopped. Speaking of which, 9 comics have been drawn so far, and 7 have been completed. That is to say, after completing 3 more, the task of Tentacle Monster can be completed. Roha touched his chin and thought for a while, then immediately a decision has been made. Start the quest. It doesn't matter if the subject is suitable or not, as long as it is a short story. Also, Roha happens to have a short comic on hand right now. One Punch Man alias One Punch Man. When he first saw this comic, Roha was also surprised. He clearly remembered that One Punch Man was not over before he crossed over. Only the first season was released, and the second season was said to be released in 2018. Unfortunately, he can't see it. However, after getting a positive answer from the system, Roha is no longer entangled, and he can draw anyway. For the release of this comic, Roha is still very confident. Unlike those comics in the past, One Punch Man is a truly invincible type of comic. On pretending, One Punch Man is number 1 in Roha's heart. Chapter 215 Saitama's Unique Way of Pretending. At a time when the new world is surging, Fantasy Magazine is still going its own way, and has launched a new work by the cartoonist, One Punch Man. According to the statistics of some people who are in a hurry, the pirates in the new world, led by the 4 Emperor's pirates, stopped all kinds of actions on the day that Dream Magazine launched the new comics, just to read the comics safely. On the Moby Dick, Marco had just bought the latest issue of Dream Magazine, hurriedly found a place to sit down, and immediately began to read it. Glancing at the cover, Marco saw a bald boy in a yellow tights and a red cape. Ugly. This was Marco's first impression. Saitama on the cover, whether in appearance or clothing taste, does not conform to Marco's aesthetics. Naturally, Marco divided Saitama into supporting roles. This kind of guy who looks casual, has a general style of painting, and doesn't even pay attention to his clothes, will definitely not be the protagonist. Maybe not even the main supporting role. Curling his lips, Marco officially began to look. The story of One Punch Man unfolds in a scene of explosions and riots. The monsters with huge bodies and looks like Dragon Ball Nameks raged in the city, constantly releasing one after another powerful light balls, killing countless ordinary people. Looking at Roha's modified comics and feeling the impact of 930 to high-quality pictures, Marco's interest was suddenly lifted, but there was still some discomfort in his heart. The plot is so fast that there is no prelude at all. This kind of casual blow can destroy several buildings, a block, and in other comics, it can be a boss-level monster, but it came out so quickly. Is this a comic devoted to fighting? Next is the protagonist coming out to fight the monster, relying on all kinds of perseverance, help and the like to defeat the monster. Or rely on this monster to explain the background plot. While Marco was guessing, the manga switched to Saitama's house, where the monster was being reported on TV. When he saw Saitama stand up in a dashing manner, and the cloak fluttered behind him and said the phrase, "Justice Execution," Marco's face suddenly became strange. Is this guy really the protagonist? Looking at the different styles of Saitama and the cuteness on the cover, Marco raised his eyebrows. It looks a little more handsome this time, but why is it bald? Is this guy really capable of fighting? Especially when Marco noticed Saitama's cramped and messy room tea and Saitama's diocese look when he was watching TV, his eyes became even more weird. Even Edward, who is known as the ugliest protagonist in the history of coats, is not as ugly as Saitama. This style of painting is as if it was drawn by the author. What the hell is this comic doing? With all kinds of ambivalence, Marco continued to read. I have to say that when I first started watching One Punch Man, Saitama's image was really a devastating blow to readers. The manga continues. Among the ruins of gunpowder smoke, the vaccine man who claimed to be born because of human pollution walked in the city with heavy steps. Every time the vaccine man makes a shot, it is accompanied by a huge explosion. In the interspersed aerial view of the city, it can be seen that most of the entire city has been destroyed by him. In the midst of the ruins, there was a sudden cry of immaturity, and a little girl who was sitting on the ground crying appeared in front of the vaccine man. Without the slightest hesitation, the vaccine man stretched out his hand and grabbed the little girl with one paw. The huge wave of palms, the depiction of the tearing air in the comics, and the vaccine man's palms that are as big as two little girls, against the background, the sense of power on the screen seems to jump out of the painting and hit Marco's heart directly. Seeing this scene, Marco's heart couldn't help but twitch. The next moment, the palms suddenly closed. Around the deck, there were scattered exclamations, and even Marco's eyes widened. But he keenly noticed that there was a description like a gust of wind above and below his hands. Sure enough, on the next page, Saitama appeared, and the little girl lay beside Saitama, safe and sound. Immediately after that, after the vaccine man questioned, Saitama said the sentence, "I am a hero of interest." Seeing Saitama smiling, even Marco couldn't help frowning. Is the protagonist a little sloppy? That is, a term that has recently spread from Skynet and has suddenly become popular. Brain damaged. Such casual words caused the vaccine man to ignite a rage. His body was full of blue veins, his height suddenly increased, his body size increased in an instant, and in an instant, he had become a monster that was many times larger than before. Saitama's small figure was not even as big as the nails of the vaccine man. The shocking picture made Marco take a deep breath. Can the bald protagonist really defeat this monster? On what? Relying on friends or some high-tech, or just like Gundam 00 at the beginning, after being beaten out of shape by the opponent, a strong man appeared to kill the monster and save the protagonist. Looking forward to the turn of the plot, Marco quickly turned to the next page. Huh. After seeing the picture on the next page, Marco leaned forward abruptly, his neck elongated, and his eyes were as wide as copper bells. I must have read it wrong. Marco twitched the corners of his mouth, flipped the comic back, and quickly flipped back. This time, he couldn't help clenching his forehead, as if supporting his collapsed worldview. What did he see? That bald head, weak chicken, bodysuit fetish, sloppy man, Dick, actually killed the monster with one punch. It's a meat sauce in one punch. What the hell is this? Marco said that the turning point of the plot was too sudden. He had read all the comics of Coates and regarded himself as an old driver, but he overturned the car in the first episode. Coach, there's something wrong with this car. Not only Marco, but all the pirates around who were watching One Punch Man were confused by the sudden turn of the plot. This bald man is so strong. Are you kidding me? With a heart full of hemp sales, Marco turned to the last page of the first chapter. What's next? The bald man proudly said how strong he was. Are the rescued people grateful to him? Chapter 216 Monsters Come On. Kill Saitama. When he saw Saitama kneeling on the ground with a bitter look on his face, he was worried, thinking that Saitama's punch had serious side effects. But when he saw Saitama kneeling on the ground, he shouted, "Damn! It's done with one punch again." Marco's mouth twitched suddenly. This guy is so pretentious. What the hell is this comic? Not only is the protagonist's painting style terrifyingly simple, but even the fighting is so simple. Then you described before, the meaning of that monster being so strong and so strong, what is it? In vain he thought he could watch a fierce and bloody fight. Marco was speechless, and closed the comic. He doesn't want to read this kind of cartoon. However, after closing the comic for a few seconds, Marco still did not move, but looked at the magazine in his hand reluctantly. It was only at this time that he felt that it seemed that when he saw the bald head kill the enemy with one punch, and then pretended to force, there was a little cool. Looking at his companions who were still reading comics, Marco raised his eyebrows, and finally opened the magazine. It's really boring, and I have nothing to do all day, so it's time to pass the time. Let's reluctantly read this issue. Well, just to pass the time, absolutely no curiosity about what happened next. 10 minutes later, Marco closed the comic with an excited look and snorted excitedly. Cool. Watching this bald man take out the enemy with one punch. Unfinished, Marco opened the comic again. He's going to watch it again. He had never seen such a refreshing comic. Looking at this bald man with a flat face, he can easily deal with the enemy with one punch, which is amazing. Half a month later, on the Moby Dick, a group of pirates gathered around Marco, who was sitting in the center. In Marco's hands, is the latest issue of Fantasy magazine. Kill him! Kill him! Brother, hold on. Hold on for 2 more pages. Silly beep. Run. You can't beat that bald man. It's been 8 pages. It's a new record. Damn, Gaushi dragged the plot. What ink marks? Can't you just punch it down and finish it? Genos is an idiot beep. What has he to do? He's beaten up every time, and a waste of time. Mew. Ouch, fuck, another page of ink. It's over, there's no drama. Q. Tilde among the thieves, there are various complaints from time to time. Since the release of the One Punch Man comics, everyone on the Moby Dick fell in love with the comic at once, and even said that Markle had seen Whitebeard and secretly watched the One Punch Man comics in the middle of the night. With the serialization of the manga, everyone's attention gradually shifted from Saitama to the monsters that kept appearing one by one. Seeing Saitama take out the monster with one punch every time, although it is very refreshing, there is a faint expectation in the hearts of everyone. When will a truly powerful monster appear and beat up Saitama? Wanting the villain to beat the protagonist can be said to have created a precedent for comics. And this kind of thinking is not only one person, but a plot that all people who read comics expect in their hearts. When the second issue was released, suddenly Marco made a suggestion. Let's bet at the opening, and bet on how many pages each villain can live after appearing. As soon as this proposal appeared, it was passed unanimously without any obstruction. And this issue of comics happens to be the first issue of gambling. Finally, the Asura unicorn, who has survived nearly 50 scenes since his appearance and has been forcing him to end, was swept in half by Saitama with one punch, ending his life. Oh, it's over. Damn it, Gaushi, this guy is a joke. How could there be a villain who lived for so long before? That's right, my savings, this time I invested half of it, it's gone. Grip the grass, this is such a rhetoric, Saitama is so stupid, and he is still forced to do it. Go up and do it early, and then be beaten to death by one punch. Among the pirates, there was a wailing sound, and no one expected that the Asura unicorn could live so long. Ha ha ha, the dealer will kill you. Marco shouted excitedly, and gathered the gold and silver treasures like a hill in front of him into his arms. Ellipsis ellipsis. 9 flowers. Che, I will definitely win it back next time. Captain Marco, did you have some dirty deal with coats? It doesn't make sense. That's it. Fuck off. Marco laughed and scolded, picked up a handful of gold and lifted it into the air. Today, my uncle, I am happy. When we return to the voyage, please have a drink. It's almost there. Captain Marco is righteous. Amidst the laughter, the pirates dispersed one after another. For the members of the 4 Emperor-level pirates, gold and silver treasures are just outside things, and they can be easily obtained. After dispersing, everyone took out the comics at the same time. The gamble is over, but when I gambled, I went through several pages, and I haven't read the manga carefully. Be sure to watch it several times. This comic is really cool. However, among the crowd, a few people did not read the comics, but quietly returned to their rooms. Do push-ups. Saitama's secret to becoming stronger: 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer long-distance run a day, surprised everyone, because this is simply too pediatric. Although there is some disdain in their hearts, some people who are addicted to comics and blindly worship the Dimension Brigade still quietly experiment. What if it really gets stronger? It is not only in the Whitebeard Pirates that there is such a change, but all over the world. All the readers who watched this issue of One Punch Man have experienced a surge of exercise. It is even said that in some large towns, every morning you can see a mighty crowd, shouting slogans, and running all over the streets. Competing in the number of push-ups, sit-ups, and squats, and the distance of long-distance running, has always become a popular activity among young people. One Punch Man has really achieved unprecedented success. He even said that when Roha saw the fan value harvested in the new January, he was surprised. He didn't expect that in this world, comics of this kind of pretending to be so popular are actually so popular. QW. Chapter 217. I'm bald. Also stronger. The Great Route, Naval Headquarters, Marin Van Do. In the huge port of Lin Fanduo, a warship is slowly docking. After leaning on, the string ladder was lowered, and a sturdy old man with arrogant purple short hair slowly stepped off the boat. Seeing the old man, the naval major who had been waiting at the port hurriedly saluted, Admiral Zephyr. Batorian, you guy, I've been telling you for so many years, but I still don't remember, I'm no longer a general. Zephyr scolded and patted his former subordinate with a kind smile. His gaze paused on the other party's bald head, and Zephyr raised his hand subconsciously to block the sunlight reflected by the other party's light bulb-like bald head. This is you. Zephyr had to turn his head and look to the other side. This bald head is so bright that Zephyr wondered if the other party had smeared a layer of oil on it. This. Major Batorian was stunned for a moment, then touched his bald head, with a little embarrassment on his face, and said with a smirk, he, nothing, shaved and cool. Cool. Zephyr strangely looked at the other party's light bulb-like bald head, puzzled. How hot is this, to get all the hair shaved? However, Zephyr didn't have the habit of caring about other people's private affairs. He shook his head. He walked towards the headquarters building. He had just returned from training recruits and was going to report to the warring states. It's just that Zephyr's expression became weirder as he walked. Are there more bald heads along the way? And that large group over there, jumping and jumping while walking, what happened to the sea soldiers like frogs? Are the current Marines so diligent? This situation continued until Zephyr walked to the training plaza in front of the headquarters, and was flashed to his eyes by the bald heads that were next to each other. Batorian, don't tell me, they are also afraid of heat. Zephyr turned his head with a weird look and put on his sunglasses quietly, only now did he feel better. It's so dazzling, and also hot eyes. Ha ha. Batorian smiled awkwardly. Zephyr, don't touch your bald head. Batorian smirked and put down his hand, rubbing it a little, but not to mention, the bald head feels good. Only after this did Batorian tell what happened. It turned out that after the serialization of One Punch Man and Saitama's defeat of the Asura Unicorn, there was indeed a training craze, and with that craze, there was the author's spit on Saitama. Open black lens bracket. I became bald and stronger. Close black lens bracket. As soon as this sentence appeared, it spread wildly among readers around the world. Some enthusiastic readers even followed Saitama and shaved their heads. It's just that how many of them have the idea of becoming stronger? Unknown. You guys. Zephyr pointed at Batorian, not knowing what to say. Say they are too stupid. How could it be so simple to become stronger? What if people just like comics? Say they're bald head and hot eyes. But that's someone's private life, and he doesn't care at all. And to be honest, there are not many navies who are willing to shave their heads and become marinated eggs. There are only 1 or 2 among a dozen people. But you must know that there are tens of thousands of navies stationed at the headquarters of Marin Vando, that is, more than 1,000 marinated eggs. Even if the Navy soldiers are trained in batches, there are at least 100 or 200 marinated eggs on the square at this time. The light is dazzling. Zephyr, who was choking on himself for a long time, finally put down his hand with a depressed face, turned his head and walked towards the headquarters building. He no longer wanted to communicate with Lu Dan. Glancing at the bald head in the square, and then looking at the Navy soldier in the square who kept closing his eyes, Zephyr hooked the corner of his mouth and pushed the sunglasses on his face. It's nice to have sunglasses. A few minutes later, Zephyr came to the outside of the marshal's office, and before he could knock on the door in front of him was opened from the inside. Afterwards, a tyrannical man with a slightly old face, but with bright eyes and a battle-hardened look, walked out of the marshal's office. After the man saw Zephyr, he silently saluted and turned to leave. Seeing the man disappearing into the corner, Zephyr couldn't help frowning. He remembered that the man seemed to be the second mate on the flagship of the Warring States period. At that time, His strength was comparable to that of a lieutenant general of the Navy headquarters. Although he is a little older now, it is not a problem to fight some major generals. But most importantly, Zephyr clearly remembered that this person should have retired 3 years ago. He also attended the other party's farewell banquet. What is this guy in the Warring States period doing? Zephyr muttered and pushed open the door of the office. Just after taking a step in, Zephyr's body suddenly stiffened in place. The next second, he hurried back and slammed the door shut. Looking at the closed door, Zephyr took a deep breath. What did he just see? Warring States. Warring States is cutting hair with scissors. In Zephyr's mind, he suddenly recalled the large bald head he saw just now, and gradually the bald head and the appearance of the Warring States period overlapped. Zephyr shuddered and pushed open the door sharply. Warring States, don't. Bald is not for you. A few minutes later, in the marshal's office, Warring States held half a pair of scissors with a speechless expression, looked at Zephyr who was standing opposite, and looked at the big hole on the wall that Zephyr had knocked out. He didn't know what to do with his face. What expression is good? What are you doing? Don't I just want to trim my hair, so what? At the end of the day, the Warring States was even more collapsed. The momentum of Zephana rushing in just now really startled him. If it wasn't for his quick reaction, it is estimated that the backhand punch just now would have hit Zephyr in the face. It's better now, his fist is closed, Zephyr himself confiscated it, and hit the wall at once. His office is broken again. Why again? Warring States was stunned for a moment, and then an old face that had been smiling all day suddenly appeared in his mind, and the corners of his eyes twitched again. Get the hell out of Carp. The account of his office was destroyed a few times before, but I haven't settled it with him. Far away in the Shinsei G5 branch, Garp, who was basking in the sun with Kizaru, suddenly sneezed violently. Oh, Mr. Carp, have you got a cold? Kizaru was wearing a tank top and shorts, lying on the sun lounger beside Carp with his legs crossed. No, I think someone is talking bad about me behind my back. Carp rubbed his nose, looking unhappy. Bad talk ... who could it be? Kizaru stretched his voice and said. Who knows, it could be some old guy, or it could be that naughty grandson of my family. Carp pouted and stood up. Stop talking, grab something to drink. What would you like to drink, Kyabu? The juice is good ... thank you, Mr. Carp. I have to say that the 2-4 Emperor pirates have been wandering, but they have no desire to attack, which makes Garp and Kizaru very satisfied. Justifiably lazy. Chapter 218 The Pitted Roha. So, do you think I'm going to shave my head? Warring States sat on the sofa with a speechless expression. Well, Zephyr scratched his head in embarrassment, knowing that he had misunderstood. Oh, forget it, it's fine. Warring States waved his hand and sighed. I have to say that under Carp's years of training, Warring States' tolerance for such things is terrifyingly high. How is the new recruit this time? It's not bad, there's a few more workouts in there, maybe get to the point of a lieutenant general by the age of 40. Speaking of the Naval Academy, Zephyr's eyes lit up, and he began to talk to the Warring States about the interesting things when training the students. It can be seen that Warring States is also very happy chatting with old friends. The two have been chatting for a long time, until the end of the chat is dry. Warring States only stood up and made up the tea for the two. Zephyr looked at the Warring States pouring tea, pursed his lips, struggled again and again, and finally asked, Warring States, the person who left just now. What happened? At the same time, a term that made him a little uneasy appeared in Zephyr's mind. Private Army. Warring States, who poured tea, was obviously stunned for a moment, and then shook his head nonchalantly. You mean him? I asked him to help me investigate something, specially invited. Saying that, Warring States filled the two with tea and sat down. What's the matter with the investigation? Zephyr didn't touch the teacup, and looked straight at the Warring States period. Sengoku did not reply immediately, but held the teacup and rubbed it lightly. After a while, the low voice of the warring states came faintly. Zephyr, do you think we are pursuing the justice in our hearts or the justice of the world government? Zephyr was stunned for a moment, then looked up at warring states, his eyes puzzled. What did you say? Let's put it this way. Warring states shook his head and smiled bitterly. Zephyr, you said that if there is a country, the citizens used to live in hot water, but one day, the original ruler died suddenly, and the new ruler came to power. She improved the living conditions for the citizens and allowed all the citizens to live. Living in peace and contentment and living a very happy life. Is she a good ruler? Is this country a good country? Of course, Zephyr replied without hesitation. But what if their leader is a wanted criminal and their army is designated as a rebel by the world government? Zephyr froze in place, his mouth opened slightly, but he didn't know what to say. After a while, Zephyr suddenly recalled the information he had seen, and raised his head to stare at Sengoku. What are you investigating? Is it the kingdom of Goa or the kingdom of Farron? Warring States was silent for a while, and finally said, all. Those new rulers, are they credible? Zephyr suddenly sneered. It's just a short-lived nobility. Of the 20 kings who established the world government 800 years ago, which one is better than them in governing the country? Which one does not treat the people better than them? They make laws, maintain order, invite all countries in the world to participate, and bring unprecedented unity to the world, and peace for hundreds of years. But, Warring States frowned and wanted to refute, but was stopped by Zephyr's wave. I know what you're trying to say. Yes, I know, the world government is corrupt now, and the self-proclaimed noble fellows of the Tianlong people are the bastards of the bastards, but so what? Have you ever thought about how the so-called rebels, the so-called revolutionary army who want to save the world, are different from the 20 kings 800 years ago? They may bring about a brief period of peace, a brief period of happiness, but that is after the destruction of the world government and the whole world torn by war. And, are you sure they won't go corrupt? They won't go into depravity. They won't go the way of the world government. Definitely. The more Zephyr spoke, the more excited he became, and finally he leaned on the table with both hands and stared at the warring states. For them to win, we still need to go through a war that covers the whole world, but if we change from the inside and nurture the next generation well, one day, we can achieve victory with less bloodshed and correct the crooked world government. And if we want to do this, we must first clean up the group of high. Having said that, Zephyr's face suddenly stiffened, the panic in his eyes flashed away, and he swallowed the words abruptly. What is high above? Warring States raised his head, frowning at Zephyr. It's nothing, you've been too tired recently, so those things will affect your mood. Take a good rest. Saying that, Zephyr left the office in a panic. Behind him, Warring States did not pursue the question, but fell into contemplation. Did he really think wrong? Zephyr, who walked out of the office, took a long sigh of relief when he saw that the Warring States did not chase after him. Fortunately, I didn't say anything. It's too early to say it now. Zephyr patted his chest and thought to himself. At this moment, a muffled sound suddenly came from outside the building, as if something exploded underground. Looking at the Navy soldiers around 257 who were not surprised, Zephyr raised his eyebrows and stopped a Navy soldier, startling the other party. What happened to that just now? Zephyr pointed to where the voice came from. Oh, which one? The sea soldier breathed a sigh of relief and said nonchalantly, I don't know what's going on. It's been going on for several days, and it rings several times a day. You didn't investigate? Zephyr asked with a frown. Of course I did an investigation. When it sounded for the first time, the Warring States generals were touched. However, the source of the sound was all on the bottom of the sea, and nothing was found. Instead, the scientific troop spoke up, saying that it was something like submarine crustal movement or submarine volcanic activity. I didn't understand it. By the way, the people in the science unit said they would stop in a few days. Quote. After the sea soldier finished speaking, he left in a hurry, leaving Zephyr to look suspiciously at the place where the voice came. He always felt that something was wrong. At the same time, under the seabed less than 5 kilometers to the east of Marin Vando, Roja was carrying a huge machine, shuttled across the seabed, and his figure appeared and disappeared. Damn, that old man in Aeolia is cheating on me. He didn't say anything before. This thing is such a big move. Chapter 219 A Chance Encounter at the Navy Headquarters. Roja, who was traveling under the sea, came to the south of Marin Vando in one breath, 4 kilometers away from Marin Vando, and then stopped. After patting the oxygen cylinder behind him and confirming that the oxygen inside was sufficient, Roja raised the behemoth in his hand and began to operate. It was a giant machine that was 5 meters high and 2 meters thick. From the outside, it looks like an oval cylinder, but after Roja's operation, the cylinder's floor suddenly opened, and 4 metal tentacles protruded from the floor and poked into the ground. On the console, operate for a while, and then, at the level of the cylinder, a dark pillar slowly stretched out and went deep into the ground. After a few seconds, the black pillar vibrated violently. Immediately afterwards, a low muffled sound came out, followed by a white wave centered on the pillar, which instantly appeared on the bottom of the sea. As for Roja, he had already hid behind the seabed rocks in the distance. When the waves passed, Roja pouted and swam slowly towards the cylinder. This is the underground detection device that Aeolia temporarily built. It weighs as much as 10 tons. If Roja's physical fitness is not a monster, he really can't play this cumbersome thing alone. What makes Roja speechless the most is that this thing not only makes a huge noise when it is used, but also has a poor detection radius. According to the joint calculation of Aeolian and Bergapunk, he would have to repeat this operation at least 20 times before he could complete the detection of the entire Marin Vando and the surrounding waters. Before that, Roja had probed 16 times and had not yet found the location of the secret research institute of the Science Force. When the underground simulation map on the underground detector was completed, Roja frowned and put the detector into the storage space. 17th time, failed. The next second, he appeared on a reef on the sea and sat down. This is trouble. Roja frowned, took out a map, marked his current location with a red cross, and looked at the map in deep thought. 17 of the 20 detection locations on the map have been detected, and now there are only 3 detection locations left. What really troubles Roja is that all 3 of these locations are on Marin Vando's island. Does it have to be a fight? Roja looked at the map speechlessly. The damage caused by the exploration on the bottom of the sea was not obvious, and no one would see it. With Vegapunk taking cover, it can be said to be smooth. But if we move to the island of the Navy headquarters to explore, if you think about it with your ass, you know you'll be discovered, okay? At that time, it will definitely fight with the Navy of the headquarters. Recalling the intelligence, Roja is a headache for the powerhouses stationed in the naval headquarters now. He can definitely beat it, and even if he can't beat him, he won't be able to keep him if he wants to run, but it's too troublesome, and he hates trouble the most. Alas. Roja sighed, put away the map, patted his butt and stood up. Who asked him to ask for it himself? Just trouble him. Curling his lips, Roja took out a series of disguised props from the storage space and began to dress up. After all, it is better to keep a low profile when it comes to stealing people. 10 minutes later, Roja has completed the cross-dressing. At this time, he is 5 centimeters taller, his skin like jade has turned into a dark tan, and even his face has become an ordinary middle-aged uncle, and the temperament of the whole person has come a 180-degree shift. Looking at the sea and taking pictures of his current appearance, Roja smiled with satisfaction. Shout out these guys, the things they prepared are pretty good. With a snap of his fingers, the next moment, Roja had already appeared in the sky above Marin Vando. After confirming the position, Roja launched teleportation again and appeared in a hidden alley in the town behind Marin Vando. As the headquarters of the most powerful military organization in the world, Marin Vando Island has not only a huge military fortress, many naval warships and countless elites of the Navy, but also a large town dedicated to the residence of military family members. Roja appeared in this town. Pulling out a map of Marin Vando from his arms, Roja walked out of the alley. Walking on the street, Roja observed this legendary town as he walked towards his destination. In the circle of pirates and the underworld, there has always been such a joke. If someone shoots a gun in the town of Marinvando and kills 10 people, at least 8 of them are family members of naval officers. Although this is an exaggeration, it can also be seen how important this town is to the Navy. Excited at the thought of doing something in a place with a defensive power comparable to that of Mary Joa. Well, turn here, go straight for another 300 meters, then turn right. Along the way, Roja looked down at the map and unknowingly came to the corner. As soon as he turned a corner, a dark shadow suddenly appeared in front of him, and Roja subconsciously stepped aside. Sorry. Roja raised his head and smiled, but before he finished speaking, his smile froze. The first thing that entered his line of sight was a dark red suit, and when he raised his head, Sakaski's slightly grim face appeared in front of Roja. What kind of luck is this? Roja was speechless and lowered his eyelids, not wanting to let Sakaski see the strangeness in his eyes. Generally speaking, the residents living in Marinvando, when they see Sakaski, look nothing but fear, admiration, and admiration. Maybe their emotions are very complicated, but they will never have the surging fighting intent in his eyes. Sakaski cast a cold glance at Roja, said nothing, turned his head and walked away. After Sakaski left, Roja looked at his back, pouted, turned and walked towards the destination. Now is not the time to fight a kainu, it is important to do business first. What Roja didn't see was that after he disappeared around the corner, Sakaski actually stopped, turned around, and looked suspiciously at the place where Roja disappeared. General, what's wrong? The guard beside him asked curiously. That person just now. Sakaski opened his mouth and finally shook his head. It's okay, it should be my illusion. Sakaski, who was walking on the street, had a little more doubt in his heart. The person just now, after seeing him, his breathing suddenly accelerated, but he calmed down in the next second, isn't it? Calm too fast. As if deliberately suppressing emotions. Chapter 220 Pinch Dusty. As a Navy Admiral, a kainu, who is in charge of all kinds of opportunities, will of course not go back and check just because of a little doubt. Moreover, this is Marine Fando, the headquarters of the Navy. Except for those who stand at the top of the world, who dares to come here to make trouble. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if the 4 Emperor-level pirates are in close proximity, the many strong men stationed in Marinfando can still make the other party return in embarrassment. Just when a kainu left the doubts in his heart and left, Roja on the other side found that he was being targeted. It's already been changed into this, and it can still be discovered. Roja hooked the corner of his mouth, turned his steps, and walked into the side alley. Not far behind him, there were 3 children who looked to be around 10 years old hiding behind a trash can. The one headed was a girl who looked older with glasses. Hey, Daski, what should I do? He went in, why don't we follow? A chubby little boy turned his head and asked. I think it's better not to follow him. Although I haven't seen that guy before, what if he came here to look for his relatives? The thinner-looking boy on the side cringed a little. You must follow, Daski said with a naive little face. This area is already on the edge of the town, and all the families of soldiers who have died have lived here. They have lived here for so many years, and every 217 households are living here. I know exactly what kind of relatives I have, and there is absolutely no guy in front of me. And you noticed it just now. He just kept looking at a piece of paper. I'm sure it must be a map. That person came here with absolutely no good intentions. But what if we misunderstood others? The skinny boy murmured. That's not right. Dusky pushed up his glasses. We didn't do anything, just follow and see, we're going to be wrong. Okay, don't talk about it, we are going to be Navy people in the future, We can't let this sneaky guy go around. I'll follow up now. You stay here. If I haven't gotten over in 30 seconds, come out from the alley to give you a signal, and you go to the adults." After speaking, Dasichi ran out with a stern face. At this time, she still had a sense of excitement in her heart, and she was about to do justice. The two little boys suddenly looked anxious, but before they could say anything, Dusky had already run away. After running to the corner, Dusky hesitated for a moment, stuck her head out and glanced inside, and in the next second, she raised her eyebrows and rushed in. "Where is the person?" Dusky ran to the middle of the alley in one breath, looked left and right, but did not find Roha at all. How could there be no one? Dusky was a little stunned. See. Although this alley is not long, it is nearly 30 meters in length. According to the speed of the man before and the time she has just delayed, it is absolutely impossible for the other party to walk out of the alley at most half of the alley. Unless. After the man entered the alley, he ran out. Sure enough, there was something wrong with that man. We must hurry to find a companion, and call the adults together. Dusky's heart tightened and she wanted to run back. Are you going to find the two of them? Suddenly a man's voice appeared behind Dusky, and together with this voice, there were two sounds of heavy objects falling to the ground. Dusky's body suddenly stiffened, and she turned her head with difficulty. First of all, it was her two comatose companions who entered Dusky's field of vision. Their eyes moved up, and Dusky happened to meet Roha's smiling eyes. Run. Must run quickly. Go call an adult. Just as this thought appeared, Dusky had already turned around and ran towards the other end of the alley. However, before she could take 2 steps, she felt a pain in the back of her head, rolled her eyes, and passed out. Really, I didn't expect to escape a kainu, and was actually followed by a child. Roha pouted and turned over Dusky, who was lying on the ground. Hey, this little guy is Dusky. Looking at Dusky, who was a little immature, but could already see the face of the beautiful embryo, Roha raised his eyebrows. I didn't expect to see her here. But seeing Dusky, Roha also understood a little why he was being targeted. It is estimated that this little girl who was overwhelmed with a sense of justice saw some flaws and followed all the way. Glancing at Dusky's flat airport, Roha glanced at his mouth. What kind of power is this? Can it develop like that when it grows up? I have to say that in the anime, Roha was very impressed by the part where Dusky and Smoker exchanged bodies. Pinching Dusky's little face, Roha tied the 3 children and threw them on the roof. He doesn't care about children, but in order to prevent them from yelling and causing trouble in advance, it is better to tie them up. After finishing the process, Roha stepped up to the target location. A few minutes later, Roha appeared in the courtyard of a house. Glancing at the middle-aged man beside him who was knocked unconscious by himself, Roha silently apologized in his heart, and then took out the underground probe. Bang! The heavy detector was put on the ground by Roha, and the ground trembled. Knowing that the time was short, Roha hurriedly manipulated. With the sound of an explosion, cracks suddenly appeared on the ground with a radius of several meters around the detector. Taking a look at the progress of the detector's exploration, Roha frowned. 10 minutes. It will take 10 minutes for the detector to fully explore this part of the subterranean terrain. That is to say, he must ensure that the detector is not damaged within 3 minutes. Feeling the domineering perception of seeing and hearing, more than a dozen figures running towards this side, Roha hooked the corner of his mouth. Time to warm up. Almost as soon as the probe was hammered into the ground, among the Marin Fando, countless strong men suddenly turned their heads and looked at the place where the sound came from. In the marshal's office, Sengoku looked indifferent, looking in the direction of the explosion. Undersea crustal movement. Undersea volcanism. What a joke. It's all on the ground. Absolutely someone is messing around. Thinking that someone was making trouble in the Navy headquarters, and it was still 3 days, the anger of the warring states rose instantly. Picking up the phone bug, it was a series of orders. At the same time, In the Marinfando training plaza and the town, two well-built men began to run at the same time. Admiral, Akainu Sakaski. Former Admiral, Black Wrist Zetha.